How do you make an Oscar-winning underwater epic like The Abyss? If you're James Cameron, almost drown yourself, then almost drown your leading man, driving him to tears, then physically and emotionally destroy everyone else around you in the quest for perfection. This video will look at the extreme lengths Cameron took on The Abyss that pushed everyone too far. We'll also take a deeper dive into why he did drastic things on set like throw and take punches, as well as ask, is the acclaim and success ever worth almost killing yourself and everyone else around you?
Well, what's the biggest challenge so far in shooting?
Living, surviving.
First, what decision did Cameron take to turn the set of The Abyss into a lethal prospect? The most crucial one was the fact that he was going to make his underwater epic underwater, arguably the most dangerous environment for humans to do anything in. Back in the mid-70s, the containment tanks at the Cherokee nuclear power plant in South Carolina were never actually used as intended. Duke Power had abandoned the facility after spending $700 million on it. Meanwhile, a young James Cameron, at high school, daydreaming about giant smurfs, is attending a science lecture about deep-sea diving on the first human to breathe liquid through his lungs. The aspiring director went on to write a short story that focused on a group of scientists in a laboratory at the bottom of the ocean. Fast forward to 1986, and a film producer from North Carolina called Earl Owensby bought the abandoned Cherokee nuclear facility and converted it into a movie studio, a decision that would be important in setting up the dangerous Abyss. In parallel, after arriving in Hollywood, having hits like The Terminator and Aliens behind him, Cameron had tweaked his underwater story, but still needed his underwater environment. The local aquarium wouldn't suffice. Cameron originally wanted to shoot on location in the Bahamas, where the story was set. But it didn't take long for him to realise that he needed to have a completely controlled environment because of the extreme stunts involved. He looked at filming in Malta, which had the largest unfiltered tank of water in the world. But this didn't work either. In typical Cameron style, he needed something bigger. That's where the old Cherokee facility came in. The dystopian location was hardly the Bahamas, but was fit for purpose. At least it seemed like it was during pre-production. Two specially constructed tanks were used for the set. The first one, based on the abandoned plant's primary reactor containment vessel, held 7.5 million US gallons of water, was 55 feet deep and 209 feet across, slightly more than your local pool. It was so big that it took 5 days to fill. This eclipsed the tank in Malta we mentioned earlier as the largest freshwater filtered tank in the world. Other scenes were shot in a second tank, an unused turbine pit, with only 2.5 million gallons of water in that one. Meanwhile, the cast and crew trained for underwater diving, unaware of what awaited them. At this point, they were probably having a lovely vacation on their diving training for 1 week in the Cayman Islands. This wasn't going to last, as their death tanks were getting filled. The cast and crew needed dive licenses because 40% of all filming took place underwater. Because of this, Cameron's production company had to design and build new equipment and develop a world-leading communication system that let the director talk to his victims directly. Not only this, but at one point, a lightning storm ripped a hole in the black tarp covering the tank used to plunge the set into eerie darkness. And since repairing it took too much time and production was already running over, Cameron insisted they only shoot at night. Hopefully the cast and crew hadn't planned on a social life for the next 6 months. Everything was now set, and whether Cameron was aware or not, he'd just built a giant death trap for his cast and crew to go play in. So what happened to the cast and crew on set? First off, Cameron led by example and made a reckless decision which almost cost him his life. Just days into production, he decided that he didn't need the underwater safety divers known as Angels, whose job was to aid any distressed cast and crew. And these guys should have been paid double for this production. Cameron went down with 40 pounds of weight to give him the stability to shoot. Later, when working with the cast, he took a breath and realised he had no air. It doesn't take a PADI license to know this ain't good. He was in a world of trouble because he was weighed down and wasn't wearing any fins. A swim to the surface was almost impossible. He tried getting the attention of the underwater director of photography, Al Giddings, over the newly developed PA, but Al had burst his eardrums during his own underwater accident. Cameron's only option was to ditch all of his gear and make a swim for the surface, or start to hope that they had movie cameras in the afterlife. He was on his way up when he was stopped by a diving safety member who did what he should have done. which was hold Cameron and stick a breather into his face to save his life. But there was just one problem. Cameron, instead of getting a mouthful of air, got a mouthful of water instead. The safety diver had no idea and continued to hold the young director down so he didn't overinflate his lungs, but Cameron knew his only chance was to get free and make a break for the surface. Desperate times call for a desperate punch in the face, and that's exactly what he did to the safety diver to free himself and ascend to the surface. He narrowly avoided his lungs exploding, and Cameron lived to tell the tale and make some of the best movies ever made, as well as Titanic, which we'll look at later as Cameron's tendency to try and drown people doesn't stop at the abyss. This drama was all just a few days into shooting, but there was 6 months of this, and it took its toll on the cast. Actress Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio had a breakdown on set, the chlorine from the tank was burning the skin of the divers, and Ed Harris ended up sobbing on his journey home from work. Then again, this wasn't exactly an average 9 to 5, especially as very few stunt actors were used. When Bud drags Lindsay back to the rig, that's really Mastrantonio holding her breath. When the rig is being flooded and characters are running from water, drowning behind closed doors, those are all actors, not stunt people. So it's no wonder then that Ed Harris almost drowned a few times, but there was one incident that was a closer call than the others. This was during the descent into the abyss seen towards the end of the movie. Harris was wearing a helmet filled with liquid. In the movie, this gives him the ability to breathe, but in real life, this gave him a near panic attack, as he had to hold his breath with a helmet full of water while being towed along a set. He ran out of air, gave the signal for oxygen, but with life imitating art, the horror of the depths became real, as his safety diver got hung up on a cable and wasn't able to get near him. Another crew member gave Harris a regulator, but because this was upside down, it was just feeding him more water. Underwater cinematographer and recently deaf crew member that we saw earlier, Al Giddings, saw what happened, ripped the upside-down regulator from Harris's mouth and gave him his own, the right way up. And we moan when the coffee machine is broken at work. After a day like that, it's no wonder that the actor broke down and cried. So, it wasn't just Cameron who ended up using his fists. Harris reportedly punched James Cameron in the face after the director kept the cameras rolling while he was nearly drowning, just in case he could use any of the dramatic footage in the movie. But the director with the water fetish didn't seem to learn his lesson. Less than 10 years later, during the shooting of Titanic, Kate Winslet caught hypothermia, chipped a bone in her elbow, and of course, true to Cameron form, almost drowned. During a scene when the cast are running away from rushing water only to be stopped by a gate, Winslet's coat got snagged on the metal. She had to work herself free out of the heavy coat and avoid being stuck making friends with gallons of flowing and freezing water. She said about the incident that, "I had no breath left. I thought I'd burst." Cameron completely ignored the situation, which pushed Winslet to try and keep calm and carry on in the challenging conditions. Later she'd say that she didn't want to be a wimp, so didn't complain. It's amazing that she went back to work with the director and water. Even more amazing that in fact on Avatar: Way of Water, Winslet hit a record-breaking 7 minutes by holding her breath underwater for that film, beating Tom Cruise's previous 6-minute record while filming Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation. After the OceanGate incident, Cameron was heavily critical of the company's cavalier attitude towards safety. So did he have a similar attitude towards his own flaws when overseeing the abyss? His treatment of Winslet on Titanic suggests otherwise. During the abyss, some of the cast claimed that he treated them like animals. In the movie's drowning scene, when Harris screams at Mastrantonio to come back and wake up, he slaps her across the face. When filming this, he saw that the crew had run out of film because there was a light on the camera, but nobody said anything. The actress understandably had enough of being slapped around the face for no reason, so stood up and said, "We are not animals," before walking off set. And after all this, Cameron still wasn't happy with the movie that was shown in cinemas. Reviews were lukewarm on release and definitely didn't justify trying to kill everyone on set. The director would later go on to dramatically change the movie with his director's cut in 1993, released after Cameron worked on Terminator 2. 30 minutes was ditched from the running time, major set pieces were altered or removed, and industrial light and magic was brought on board to complete CGI sequences that they then had better tech for. Seemed like pushing the cast and crew to their limits wasn't quite enough for Jim. But was it all worth it? The movie debuted at number 2 at the domestic box office, just behind the comedy Parenthood, and went on to gross $90 million from a budget of around $45 million. So it probably wasn't worth it as far as box office goes. especially compared to Aliens and The Terminator, where no one got a lungful of water. But more significantly, it won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects and was nominated for 3 others. Clearly, the Oscar wasn't good enough for Cameron, as he couldn't resist messing around with the effects in his director's cut. Some people just can't be pleased. This Academy Award helped pave the way for Cameron to make 1991's Terminator 2 and the rest of his visually pleasing giant budget projects. So if it wasn't for The Abyss, none of this might have happened. Then again, Cameron was so close to dying, none of this might have happened anyway.